A beggar saved a millionaire's son. Nobody saw this coming. ***. The black sedan hit the guardrail at 60 miles an hour, flipped once, and came to rest upside down in a drainage ditch on the outskirts of town, and the only witness to the crash was a homeless man named Ezra Cole, who hadn't eaten a full meal in 3 days. Before we go further, if you believe that kindness always finds its way back to us, and that second chances are real, hit that like button, drop a comment below, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Hope and Wisdom so you never miss a story like this one. Ezra had been pushing his shopping cart along Route 9 that humid afternoon, the sun beating down on cracked asphalt, when he saw the sedan swerve to avoid a dog and lose control. He didn't think. He dropped everything he owned, a torn blanket, a half-empty water bottle, the last of his dignity folded into a cardboard sign, and ran toward the wreckage faster than his aching knees had moved in years. Smoke curled from the engine. Inside, upside down and pinned by a crumpled door, was a boy no older than 9, blood trickling from his temple, crying out for his father in a voice thin with terror. Ezra didn't know that the boy's father was Walter Ashford, a man whose name sat on the top floor of glass towers downtown, whose fortune could have bought the entire street Ezra slept on. He didn't know any of that. All he knew was that a child was trapped in a burning car and every second mattered. He tore his shirt off, wrapped it around his hand, and smashed the window. Glass bit into his knuckles. He didn't feel it. He reached in, cut the boy's seatbelt with a rusted pocket knife he'd carried since his own son was alive, and pulled him free just as flames began licking up from the engine block. He carried the boy, whose name was Julian, 30 yards from the wreck and laid him in the grass, pressing his torn shirt against the wound on his head, whispering the same words over and over, stay with me, you're going to be all right." The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later. By then Ezra had given Julian his own jacket for warmth and was holding the boy's small trembling hand, telling him stories about the stars just to keep him talking, keep him conscious, keep him from slipping away. When the paramedics finally lifted Julian onto the stretcher, the boy wouldn't let go of Ezra's hand. He kept saying, don't leave me, and Ezra, this man the world had stopped looking at years ago, this man who slept behind a laundromat and ate from dumpsters when he had to, walked beside that stretcher all the way to the ambulance doors, promising a stranger's child that everything would be okay. Walter Ashford was in a business meeting in another city when he got the call. His hands shook so badly he couldn't hold his phone, and his assistant had to book the flight while Walter simply stood by the window of his office, staring out at a skyline he'd spent his whole life climbing toward, realizing in that moment that none of it, the buildings, the deals, the money, meant anything if he lost his son. He arrived at the hospital 4 hours later, still in his suit, tie loosened, eyes hollow from a flight spent imagining the worst. The doctors told him Julian would live. A concussion, a fractured wrist, some stitches, but he would live. And Walter, a man who negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts without blinking, broke down sobbing in the hallway of that hospital like a child himself. When he finally composed himself enough to ask what happened, a nurse told him about the homeless man who had pulled his son from the wreck, who had stayed with him, who had refused to leave until the paramedics arrived, who had walked out of the hospital afterward without giving his name because he didn't think it mattered. Walter spent 3 days searching. He hired people, showed security footage from a nearby gas station to shelters across the county, walked the streets himself in shoes that had never touched pavement like that before. He found Ezra on the 4th day, sitting against the same laundromat wall, wrapped in the same torn blanket, his bandaged hand still healing from the glass. Walter didn't say a word at first. He just sat down on the sidewalk beside him, in his tailored coat, in the dirt and grime of a street he'd never once noticed before, and he began to cry. Ezra didn't understand who this man was or why he was crying, until Walter finally managed to say the boy's name, Julian, and Ezra's whole face changed, because he had thought about that child every single day since, wondering if he'd made it, wondering if the star's story had helped him hold on. Walter told him everything. He told him Julian was healing, that Julian hadn't stopped talking about the kind man who held his hand, that Julian had asked, every single day, to see him again. And then Walter did something nobody saw coming. He didn't just offer Ezra money. He offered him a home, a job managing outreach for a foundation Walter would build in Julian's name, and something Ezra hadn't had in years, a reason to wake up in the morning. Ezra later learned that his own son had died of an overdose 8 years earlier, after a system that failed them both turned its back, and pulling Julian from that wreck, for one terrifying, beautiful moment, had felt like being given back everything he'd lost. Julian, once he was well enough, hugged Ezra so tightly in that hospital room that the nurses had to gently remind him about his fractured wrist, and Ezra held that little boy like he was made of glass and gold all at once. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us what part moved you most, and share it with someone who could use a reminder that kindness still matters in this world. And before we go, if you're watching this, do us one small favor and comment the word kindness below, just so we know this story reached you. Ezra Cole never went back to that sidewalk. He spent the rest of his years teaching others that dignity isn't about what you have, but about what you're willing to give, and somewhere in that town, a boy named Julian grew up knowing that the greatest heroes don't always wear suits or carry money. Sometimes they carry nothing at all, except a heart big enough to save a stranger.